everyone. My name is Francine, Laqua, and the big question we'll try and answer in the next 20 minutes is what will a comprehensive global baseline of sustainability disclosure standards mean for the financial markets? I am delighted today to be joined by Erkki Liikanen. He's the chair of the IFRS Foundation Trustees to discuss the formation, of course, of a new international sustainability standards board and what is next for the standard setting journey. So, Mr. Liikanen, as always, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time. Now, whatever you think of COP26, the takeaway, of course, is at the intersection of the capital markets and climate was the formation of this international sustainability standard boards. What does it mean for the financial community?
The real challenge for climate change is that we need a lot of capital to the transition. You know, industry must go through enormous transition. It cannot be financed by public money. So you need investments. To be able to do the investments, of course, the capital markets need to know what is it worth, what will happen, what is the disclosure of these activities. And what we are working now on is to start to create transparent, comparable, sustainability disclosure standards. And that is big change. So we would know more. Investors can assess the information what companies will give in the future.
But Mr. Liikanen, first of all, how urgent is it that we get something concrete, and why did you decide to do this now?
I think that's a very good question. Let's say we have come to the mainstream. Earlier climate issues were dealt with the finance ministers. Now in Venice and also in Glasgow, you had the finance ministers, central bank governors, even heads of states. So it's becoming the mainstream issue. But still, today there are so many different standards. It's very complex. It's the people speak about alphabet soup. You don't really know. The investors need to be able to compare and draw their own conclusions. This will be a big change. We will start from climate, but we will move on once we get the first standards in that area.
So end of 2021, how urgent is it to create these global standards? What do investors, as investors wait for this, actually, is there a danger that we have even more greenwashing that we've had so far?
That's exactly the point. I mean, if we don't have a transparent, comparable standards, the risk of greenwashing is very, very important. And now there are two major issues which have now changed. We have decided to consolidate the sector so that standard setters, major standard setters such as Value Reporting Foundation, Issb, will merge with the IFRS Foundation. It gives clarity, already transparency, and that's very important. Second is also that we came out with a prototype. So what type of standard could it be in the future? Prototype is now available, so the markets, investors, anybody can study, because we will work on from that basis.
Where do you see the biggest challenge, Mr. Liikanen, arising in the formation of this global rule book on disclosures?
I think biggest challenge is now that we have two issues at the table at the same time, urgency and standardization. Normally standardization is a very slow process, but now we have urgency with the climate change. So this is something we have never experienced before. And we have tried to help it really with a lot of preparatory work from the summer on, so that once we get the nominations done, so we have the chair and vice chairs for the Sustainability Standards Board, we could have a running start. That's in standardization field, perhaps for the first time we do so.
To create a truly global rule book, do you think there will have to be compromises? So will we end up with something that's imperfect, but at least global, and is that better than striving to have something with more teeth?
Very justified question. I would say that we need one global baseline because climate change is a global issue. It doesn't stop at the borders, not even at borders of big jurisdictions. So this kind of global baseline, when we have Americas, Asia, Europe, Middle East, Africa, is critical. Then, of course, jurisdictions and countries who have higher ambitions, they can add up their own requirements. But it's very important these two are interoperable. So this global baseline would apply for all. And that's also what the markets need. I mean, capital markets are global. Investors move from country to country. They need to be able to compare. But this complementarity, the approach of, let's say, building blocks is the one we trust.
And Mr. Liikanen, I know it's still very early days, but how will this newly formed body entity be able to shift capital markets and the economy into one that is cleaner and fairer? What kind of timeline and what kind of steps are you thinking about?
Let's say first, if we get the first standard next autumn, as I hope, it is a disclosure standard. So investors know more about the behavior of the companies. They need to disclose more, explain and report. Of course, that will have impact on the pricing. And through the prices, it has impact on the capital markets. And I think in that area, the trends can change relatively fast.
Can you give us a sense, and I know you've touched on this already, but where the lack of harmonization is very dangerous, or what part of the market will be more difficult to get everyone aligned?
I think that in political terms, we are quite happy that G20 countries welcomed this initiative. So we have broader global support for the work we have ever had. And now the question is that when we get this global standard, baseline standard ready, that also the countries will implement it. And I hope in the end make compulsory. Because of course, voluntary is important, market is important, but it's more powerful, of course, if it's also mandatory in countries.
So do you see, the EU, for example, supporting the ISSB or just focus on taxonomy and CSRD?
Let's say so that EU has said, especially their Vice President, Valdis Dombrovskis has said that they can't do this alone. You need EU, but you need the whole world. So they support this idea of this global baseline, but it's clear that Europe is here a leader. They are more advanced, so they want to build up their own requirements on that. So at the moment, really in the context of G20 countries, we have had all major economic and political powers supporting this baseline concept, and that's why we are quite optimistic. But really, we need to move fast, and that is new. And then when we have the standard, then how the different countries will start to implement, and the end, hopefully make them mandatory, is the story we need to follow, and we need many operators there.
Mr. Liikanen, I have a question from the audience, so everyone in the audience, please send as many questions as you want. We love having questions. We love hearing from you. So this person is asking, when will the ISSB have its leadership in place, and what type of leader are you looking for? I don't know if it's a job pitch or not.
It is a very, very good question, and we are just working with the nomination. I really hope that we could have at least the chair nominated by the end of the year. So we announced the ISB in early November, and now chair would be nominated. We need people who know financial reporting and who know also sustainability reporting. They are complementary tasks. There must be certain interconnectivity. So we need people with broad background. I hope we also have people who have really already experience on the sustainability work. And I know among the candidates that we have been able to attract great number of talents, but we must follow the proper procedures. And in the end of that procedures, we have at least chair, I believe, by the end of the year, vice chair soon, and then we go for the board. But let's say first quarter next year, we should be quite ready to be active.
Mr. Liikanen, I have another question from the audience. Thank you so much, Mr. or Mrs. audience member, for sending it in. The IFRS reported that the plan is to work with integrative reporting. And so this person asks, at present, many companies work with GRI. What will this look like in the future?
GRI will be a very important partner for us. Of course, let's say the difference is that the International Financial Reporting, International Sustainability Standards Board will focus on investor needs. So that's clear mandate for us. GRI has broader scope and broader audience. But of course, these can be very well complementary, and I'm sure we'll have a good dialogue also in the future.
Okay, and I want to talk to you a little bit more about complementarity, but there is a lot of talk, Mr. Liikanen, about a just transition, about a fair transition in general, and a pretty big acknowledgement that developing nations are coming in the transition from a positive or from a position of disadvantage compared to some of the developed markets. Should accounting rules actually take this into account?
I think somehow they must be transparent and comparable. And we have decided put that as a focus, that we have a major focus on developing emerging countries, and also have standards which can be applied also for smaller companies when they so want. I think we must look at this issue in detail, but this kind of able to apply in all circumstances is critical. But in general, of course, the whole climate change has a problematic distributional impacts. I mean, I just have seen studies who see that, for instance, carbon tax, which according to the economists is one of the key instruments for the solution, and most efficient ones, it has, for the distribution, negative impact. So policymakers must handle many issues at the same time. But it's not something standardization can solve.
No, I was going to say, how do you model that? It's very difficult to actually make something that, is fairer, comparable, but different.
Yes, of course, but our task is more limited, because what we want to do is standards so that the companies need to disclose all essential information in this field, and then investors can, from that basis, price their own investments. But of course, distribution impacts are very important, but they are more for policymakers who are mandated for those issues.
Mr. Liikanen, critics, some critics say that at the end of the day, the Issb is another voluntary standards setter with no enforcement capabilities. So it's just a lot of talk, and we don't really know where it goes. How do you respond to that criticism?
I don't believe so. I said already earlier that this climate change issue has come to the mainstream. People want to see action. They want to see change. In that area, of course, we must move step by step. First, have a standard. Then IOSCO, which is the International Organization of Securities Commissions, will analyze its applicability. Then it goes to the policymakers who think about making it mandatory. Then also, let's say, auditing business is important, because they need to analyze whether they have been properly implied. I'm quite convinced that this chain will be more efficient than people expected today, because of the commitment really of policymakers in all levels.
So I know, the Issb is meant to encourage the uptake of standards globally. Could you give us a little bit of an idea of what this encouragement could look like?
Can I just say that first we have decided to make Issb a different type of organization. IFRS, which is International Financial Reporting Organization, is based in London. So it's one place, and our main staff is there. We have one office in Tokyo. But because sustainability is different global issue, there are many, let's say, elements which are sensitive politically. We have wanted to make it a global footprint. So already we have decided that we have the office for this standard board one will be in Frankfurt, where the chair will be sitting, other one in Montreal, and third will be in Asia, so that they are present in the field and they are there to inform and also mobilize people. At the same time, it's consolidation when we have consolidated voluntary initiatives in that area with the IFRS Foundation. It means that we have presence also in Americas, and we are in that area. So we try to make this global presence very strong, because then we're able to act throughout the globe.
And of course, this will depend on regulators, but how much does it depend? How much does your strategy also depend on government?
Of course, let's say now we have got we can act for the standards now. We have got the support for G20 countries. We will move on. Now, I must say also that many governments have been ready to invest in seed capital. So we have resources to move on. But of course, in the end of the day, the commitment from the governments is critical if you want to make this mandatory. And we also need, as I said earlier, we need also audit profession, which give assurance whether they have been properly applied. So all the public authorities, regulators are needed. But it's so different compared to what it was 20 years ago. I was 20 years ago in the European Commission when we created IFRS standards. And EU started to endorse those. At the same time, Kyoto Protocol was signed. But these two roads never met. We're totally separate ones. Today we talk about financial reporting and sustainable reporting at the same time. I try to find their complementarities in that area.
Can I just ask you a little bit more about, this idea of encouraging? How do you encourage? How does, if this picks up, does it automatically encourage other companies, or is there a snowball effect? Is there pressure points that you could put in place?
Of course, with communication, we can put pressure, but I'm sure that investors want to know more. And I mean, when we made this proposal known in early February, in early March, there was a big relief in the investor community that now finally something clear and more transparent happens, because they need these tools. And when investors ask companies, and if they say that we are not able to properly report, I think it is a terribly disincentive. There'll be a premium which this will cost. So I'm sure that markets will push forward. We give the tools to make it simpler and clearer.
I mean, another question that's coming in is, what kind of feedback you have been hearing from companies and investors since announcing the ISSB? So you were just talking about some of the companies asking things before the announcement in March. Are they concerned about the timeline? Are there any specific requests by companies to formulate it in a certain way?
Not really. I must say what has helped us is the Task Force for Climate Disclosures, which has made a major report a few years ago. And many companies, many governments are supporting. We start from there. We have made prototype from that basis, and that will be basis for the work which will lead to standard. So companies have been involved. I would say that investor world has been very much supportive and pushing us to go forward. When we made the announcement, this International Sustainability Standards Board was very much expected. But what surprised the markets was that we were able to have a solution to this alphabet soup, have simplicity, clarity, major consolidation, and that has been very much welcomed. Perhaps I must say that for the announcements, more happened than people expected. But now it's more important, of course, that we act and we surprise positively also in that direction.
I understand, you've laid it out very simply and very articulately what you're hoping to achieve. But is there something that you think the ISSB will be capable of solving, concretely? Is there a problem that you see right now in ESG that you think will be fixed in the next 24 months?
I think that on the climate standard, we will be able to do it. So that there'll be first climate standard, I hope, this time next year. And then it means that the companies, when they report, they use that standard as the basis. And investors require information which comes from that basis. I hope we have also able to accept the kind of presentation standard, how all these standards will look. Beyond that, once this is done, of course, then we need to move forward in the areas where there's a strong demand, social governance. There are no simple issues there either, but I'm sure that we must learn from the experience and also go broader areas, but it's demand driven. I just want to say that we did not look for new mission. We didn't fish for new tasks. It's been very strongly demand driven, and that gives us also strong justification.
Mr. Liikanen, I have another question from the audience, which basically is asking, how will the multi-stakeholder expert consultative committee work on the building blocks approach across jurisdictions? And is this just with governments or broad stakeholders like investors?
The multi-stakeholder group mainly includes international institutions who have been active in this area, like United Nations, OECD, and the others. But of course, we are careful also to include for instance, civil society in the discussions. There are places and opportunities for civil society to participate, because we need investors, because it's investor driven, it's investor demand. But today also the citizens, civil society, the NGOs has huge impact also on the preferences of the people, and they have impact on the market. So we need to be able to also include them into dialogue.
Should we be expecting more consolidation? So GRI, CDP, beyond VRF and CDSB being absorbed, are we going to see things come together more?
Now, GRI has a different scope. So they do important work, but they are focusing to the multi-stakeholder area. But now with these solutions, we have the basic solution for investor, for those companies, for those organizations who have investor focus and who focus on the enterprise value. I think we need to get this consolidation done now. We have announced it, we have agreed, but we need to make it work. And let's see it beyond that after we have implemented this whole.
How does the ISB relate to other initiatives like TCFD or SASB?
TCFD is a very close partner. They have been working with us a lot and supporting us. And when we are doing this prototype, which like really first phase basis for new standard, TCFD has been a very good partner, and we have benefited from the major work which we did during the years, and also from their support this on.
I mean, someone's asking actually, do you plan to use a Bloomberg model task force for the IFRS climate disclosure standards?
They say that their recommendations, which they made, are important part of information which we will use when we work for the standards. And the prototype, which has been really public now, is based on those recommendations.
I have another question. I love engagement from the audience, Mr. Liikanen. Will institutional investors, such as foundations, be included in the stakeholder community, providing information and perspective of use to IFRS?
I'm sure we will find many ways for dialogue with all the institutions who are interested. I don't want to define the limits of bureaucracy, what we need to build up, but we will be very open. We need their advice, we need their support in this work, and I'm sure we see often in this long path. And many institutions have done, and foundations worked for a long time in this area, and they will not give in now because we have more progress.
Well, we're almost out of time, so let me go back just to the timeline. Once you have the standards in place, how do you convince companies and others to actually use them?
Let's say, of course, if they become mandatory, then they all need to do it. But I'm sure that before they are mandatory, there will be strong pressure from the markets. Investors want to know more, and when standard is there, they require information which is based on these standards. So this market-driven process, market-led process will be very strong. And I hope relatively soon also they will be made mandatory.
Do you think in terms of the framework, because, and we were touching on that right at the beginning of the interview when we're talking about Europe and regulators and whether they'll adopt some of the standards that you'll be putting in place, does the European framework end up becoming some sort of global benchmark because they've been spearheading this, the effort sooner than everybody else?
I must say we must give a lot of credit to Europe because they have been really leading in many areas. But climate change is a global problem. We need to have a global baseline. I mean, let's say if we don't have Asia with us, it's a major problem. And for that reason, especially today, we work very much with all continents, also with Asian institutions, Asian organizations, so that they are part of this big effort. So Europe is important, they saw direction, but the problem is global and solutions need to be global.
So this person's writing in, where will ISSB be located?
The ISB will have 3 locations. So now the seat of the board will be in Frankfurt, and the chair will have office there. But equally important will be Montreal, which will focus on the Americas, and they will have also major activities. And third, we will also locate one office to Asia. And it's clear that Beijing and Tokyo will be mentioned in that context.
Mr. Liikanen, a final question. When you look at the stratospheric rate of growth in the ESG market, I think we're looking at $35 trillion in last year in total assets. That's according to Bloomberg Intelligence, and then more than 50 trillion by 2025. Does that give you pause? Is there a risk that actually these numbers are inflated?
There is a risk, of course, and I must say that if there's greenwashing, there'll be also disappointments. And for that reason, I think that faster we move on the basis of the standards, which are comparable and verifiable, better for the whole business. So let's hope that we avoid any major tragedies there, but can be only avoided in the long term when we have transparent, comparable standards with metrics.